They say the screams could be heard for miles. It was the summer of 1462. You're an Ottoman soldier in the most powerful army on earth. You've conquered Constantinople. You've toppled empires. You're marching into a tiny principality called Wallachia to crush a rebel prince. It should take weeks, maybe days. Then you smell it. Death, rot, something else you can't quite name. Your column slows. The scouts have stopped moving. And as you round the hill near the capital city, you see it. A forest. But the trees, they're not trees. They're human beings. 20,000 of them. Your brothers, your comrades, lifted into the air on wooden stakes, arranged in perfect geometric rows as far as the eye can see. Some have been dead for weeks, their bodies bloated and black. Others are still moving, still breathing, still screaming. Your sultan, the man who conquered the Byzantine Empire, takes one look and turns his entire army around. What kind of mind creates something like this? And here's the part that should terrify you. This wasn't madness. It was strategy. Cold, calculated, and horrifyingly effective. The story you think you know about Vlad the Impaler? It's a lie. Not because it didn't happen, but because the truth is so much worse. This is the full account of how one man weaponized human suffering so effectively that it changed the course of empires. And by the end, you'll understand why the real horror wasn't what he did to bodies. It was what he did to minds. Let's start with the question nobody asks. What breaks a human being so completely that they become capable of this? This is our first open loop. The year is 1442. Vlad is 11 years old. His father, Vlad II Dracula, has just made a deal with the devil. Not a metaphorical one, a real one with a name, Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire. The deal is simple. Vlad II gets to keep his throne in Wallachia. In exchange, he hands over his two youngest sons as hostages, living collateral to guarantee his loyalty. So young Vlad and his brother Radu are torn from their home and delivered to the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Not as prisoners in dungeons, but as guests in the palace at Edirne. They're given fine clothes, education, and military training. On the surface, it looks like privilege, but here's what history glosses over. This wasn't education. It was psychological warfare. Vlad spent his formative years, 11 to 17, watching his captors perfect the art of empire building. He studied how the Ottomans used fear as a governing tool. He witnessed public executions designed not just to punish, but to traumatize entire populations into submission. He learned that terror, when applied with surgical precision, was more effective than any army. And he learned something else. He was utterly powerless. While his younger brother Radu adapted, even forming a close friendship with the Sultan's son, Mehmed, Vlad refused to bend. He was frequently punished for his defiance. Some accounts suggest he was beaten. What's certain is this: something fundamental broke inside him during those years. Or, perhaps more accurately, something crystallized. Every punishment he endured, he studied. Every torture technique he witnessed, he memorized. He was building a mental arsenal piece by piece.
In 1448, after 6 years of captivity, Vlad finally returned to Wallachia. 2 months later, his father was assassinated by rival boyars, the nobility who played both sides between the Ottomans and Hungarians. His older brother, Mircea, was buried alive. Vlad was alone, surrounded by enemies. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted to remake the world in the image of his trauma. He would take everything the Ottomans had taught him about terror and refine it into something they had never seen before. If you are finding this deep dive into the historical figures who weaponized psychology fascinating, please consider subscribing to the channel. We are committed to exposing the calculated strategies behind history's darkest chapters, not just the gore, but the genius that made them effective. Hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss our next analysis of a true life monster. But first, he had to wait. For 6 more years, Vlad lived in exile, plotting, planning, studying military tactics and political maneuvering. And in 1456, with Hungarian backing, he finally seized the Wallachian throne. The monster was about to be born.
Vlad's coronation feast in 1456 should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the blueprint for everything that followed. He invited the boyar families, the same nobility who had orchestrated his father's murder and buried his brother alive. Hundreds arrived, believing they were there to pledge loyalty. The great hall was decorated. Wine flowed freely. Then, in the middle of the feast, Vlad stood up and asked a simple question. How many princes of Wallachia have you lived through? The older boyars proudly bragged about their survival, their ability to outlast any prince who sat on the throne. Vlad smiled. Then he gave an order. Every boyar who had answered was arrested on the spot. But here's the methodical mind at work. He didn't execute them all. He separated them into 2 groups. The older ones, the architects of his family's destruction, were impaled immediately outside the palace walls. Not quickly. The stakes were carefully inserted to avoid vital organs, ensuring they would die slowly over hours or days. Their screams provided the soundtrack for what came next. The younger, stronger boyars and their families were force-marched 50 miles north to the ruins of Poenari Castle. There, they were given a choice that wasn't really a choice. Rebuild the fortress with their bare hands or die. Most died during the construction. The survivors, they were never the same. Vlad had effectively erased the old nobility and replaced them with a new class who owed everything to him and lived in absolute terror of his displeasure. This wasn't just revenge. It was a systematic dismantling of the power structure that had made Wallachia weak. He didn't just want obedience. He wanted to break people so completely that obedience became their only possible response.
But this was still domestic politics.
What Vlad did next would send shockwaves across empires. In 1459, Sultan Mehmed II, the same Mehmed who had been Vlad's childhood companion, sent envoys to Wallachia demanding the annual tribute. The demand came with an insult. Vlad was to present himself personally in Constantinople. The envoys arrived expecting political theater. What they got was a preview of hell. When they entered Vlad's court and refused to remove their turbans, a genuine religious custom in Ottoman protocol, Vlad asked them to explain their tradition. They did, probably relieved that he seemed interested. Vlad nodded thoughtfully. Then he said something that must have frozen their blood. "I respect a man who honors his faith so completely. Let me help you honor it forever." He ordered his guards to nail the turbans directly to their skulls. He didn't kill them. He mutilated them in a way that was both symbolically loaded and medically calculated to ensure they'd survive the journey back to Constantinople. They were walking messengers, their screams echoing across the countryside as they fled back to the Sultan. Mehmed understood immediately. This wasn't the childhood friend he remembered. This was something new, something that had taken the Ottoman lessons in terror and evolved them into a more terrifying final form. War was now inevitable.
Before that war came, Vlad had more messages to send. Here's what most people don't understand about impalement. It wasn't just execution, it was engineering. The common image, a stake driven straight through the torso, would kill almost instantly. That defeats the entire purpose. Vlad's method was far more sophisticated and infinitely more cruel. Based on contemporary medical analyses of the descriptions, the victim was laid face down. The stake was carefully selected, rounded at the tip, and thoroughly oiled. It was inserted through the rectum at an angle specifically designed to miss all major organs and blood vessels. The victim was then slowly raised upright, and gravity did the rest. Over the course of hours or sometimes days, their own body weight would force the stake gradually upward through their torso. The path was calculated to avoid the heart and lungs. The victim could remain alive for up to 3 days.
Why this method? Because Vlad understood something that modern psychological warfare experts now confirm. Witnessing prolonged suffering is exponentially more traumatizing than witnessing quick death. A battlefield beheading is horrific but brief. Impalement was a performance that lasted days, complete with screams that could be heard across entire valleys. But the physical act was only one component. The real genius was in the staging. Maximum visibility. He impaled victims in public squares, along major roads and outside city gates, anywhere that would maximize visibility. He understood that word of mouth and rumor would multiply the psychological impact far beyond the actual number of victims. Visual hierarchy. Stakes were different heights based on rank. Peasants near the ground, nobles higher, the highest reserved for enemy commanders. This created a grotesque visual hierarchy that reinforced his message: everyone has a place in my world, and everyone will suffer according to their station. There is a German pamphlet from 1462 that describes Vlad dining among the impaled. He allegedly had a table set up in the middle of a field of stakes, ate his meals surrounded by dying men, and seemed to enjoy the experience. Whether this specific incident happened exactly as described is debatable, but the psychological message is not. I am so far beyond your understanding of human behavior that your horror doesn't touch me.
Was terror actually an effective military strategy, or was Vlad just a sadist with power? The answer came in the summer of 1462. Sultan Mehmed II had finally had enough. Vlad had refused to pay tribute and launched raids deep into Ottoman territory, killing over 23,000 people. Mehmed, who commanded the most powerful military machine on earth, assembled an army estimated between 60,000 and 90,000 men, more than triple Wallachia's entire military-age male population. A conventional battle would be a massacre. So Vlad did what he'd been planning since childhood. He refused to give them a conventional battle. Scorched earth. As the Ottoman army entered Wallachia, they found nothing. Empty villages, poisoned wells, burned fields. Every source of food and water was systematically destroyed. Guerrilla warfare. The night raids began. Small groups of men would strike Ottoman camps in the dead of night, killing sentries, setting fires, and disappearing like ghosts. The goal wasn't to defeat the army. It was to make them paranoid, exhausted, and demoralized. But the masterpiece came on the night of June 17, 1462. Vlad personally led a force of about 10,000 men in what became known as the night attack. Under cover of darkness, they infiltrated the massive Ottoman camp with one objective: kill the Sultan. They came within yards of Mehmed himself. The Ottoman casualties were relatively light, but the psychological damage was catastrophic. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire had nearly been killed by a vastly outnumbered enemy who struck from nowhere.
The Ottoman soldiers were exhausted and rattled, and then they reached the capital and they saw what Vlad had been preparing for them. Imagine you're an Ottoman soldier. You're hungry, exhausted, and jumpy. As you approach the Wallachian capital, the smell hits first. Then you see the stakes. They stretch to the horizon in every direction. The field of impaled bodies extended for nearly 2 miles in length. Modern historians debate the exact number, but the truth is probably between 15,000 and 20,000 impaled bodies. The site was organized, precise geometric patterns, concentric circles. Some of the bodies had been dead for weeks, others were still alive. The moaning of the dying could be heard across the entire field. The Ottoman troops, hardened veterans who had slaughtered countless enemies, reportedly began vomiting. Some refused to advance further. Others started deserting in the night, willing to risk execution rather than continue through this nightmare. Sultan Mehmed II, who had ordered his own share of massacres, reportedly stopped his horse and stared in silence. The most widely accepted account quotes him, "It is not possible to deprive his country a man who has done such great deeds. A man who had done such things was worth much." This wasn't praise, it was recognition.
the forest of the Impaled was the psychological breaking point. It proved that conventional military thinking didn't apply here. Vlad wasn't trying to win battles. He was trying to break minds. And it was working. Mehmed ordered a general retreat. The most powerful military force in the world had been turned back, not by military defeat, but by sheer psychological warfare. Vlad the Impaler had won.
But the story doesn't end there. Terror, however effective in the short term, always devours its wielder in the end. You'd think turning back the Ottoman Empire would make Vlad a hero in Christian Europe. In some ways it did, but Vlad couldn't turn it off. The methods that defeated the Ottomans didn't stop with the Ottomans. He used them on everyone. He was impaling Wallachian merchants for price gouging, boyars suspected of disloyalty, and entire villages for minor infractions. The tool he'd forged to defeat a superior enemy had become his only tool for everything. His brother Radu, backed by Ottoman gold, positioned himself as the sane alternative. Hungarian support evaporated as Vlad's increasingly erratic behavior alienated his allies. In November 1462, just months after his greatest triumph, Vlad was forced to flee. He was imprisoned by his supposed ally, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. He spent 12 years in captivity. In December 1476, Vlad was killed in battle against an Ottoman force near Bucharest. His head was cut off, preserved in honey, and sent to Sultan Mehmed as proof of death. After everything, the terror, the impalement, the psychological warfare, Vlad ended up as a trophy displayed for mockery in the capital of the very empire he'd fought his entire life.
To the world, Vlad became synonymous with vampirism and supernatural evil, Dracula, which in a perverse way lets us off the hook. It's easier to think of him as a monster, something inhuman, than to confront the real horror. Because the real horror is this: everything Vlad did was human, painfully, terrifyingly human. He wasn't born a monster. He was created by a system that taught him that power comes through terror, that survival requires absolute ruthlessness, that empathy is weakness, and he took those lessons and refined them to their logical extreme. The question isn't whether Vlad was evil. That's obvious. The question is, what does it say about human nature that this method was so effective? Against impossible odds, using nothing but calculated terror, Vlad turned back an empire. He proved that fear, properly weaponized, could accomplish what armies couldn't. If you want to keep uncovering the uncomfortable truths that textbooks bury, subscribe. Because history's darkest chapters aren't just about what happened, they're about understanding why it worked. And that's the knowledge we can't afford to forget.